The town called her the Orphan-Train girl for 18 years and never once troubled to learn her name, and on the night it put her out into the first blizzard of the season, it did not think to ask. She stood on the depot platform at dusk, with a worn carpet-bag in one hand and a stamped tin tag closed in the other, and the snow came down thick and quiet and without any hurry at all, as it comes down in that country when it means to bury a thing for good. She was 30 years old. She had no roof anywhere in the territory that would take her, no last name that any ledger in town had bothered to write, and no soul under heaven who knew at that hour that she was cold. A woman standing alone in mountain weather at nightfall does a certain arithmetic, and she did it there without moving her lips. How far to the next town, how long a body lasts in cold like that, how many hours of dark were left before morning would come and find whatever the night chose to make of her. She had stood on that same platform once before and done the very same sum, a long time ago, when she was small, and it was there, at the bottom of the figures, that the whole of her life turned over. She had come west on the Orphan-Train at 11 years old, one of 40 children shipped out from the eastern cities with their given names pinned to their coats and a placing agent walking the aisle between the benches. At every stop the train made, families came out onto the platform and walked the line of waiting children as a buyer walks a line of stock at auction, feeling the arms of the strong ones, smiling at the fair ones, choosing the small and the sweet and the young. 7 times the line was walked. 7 times she stood at the end of it with her chin up, too old to be thought cute, too plain to be wanted quickly, and far too proud, even then, to plead for a home. 7 times the choosing passed her by. At the last depot on the line there were no families left and no children left but her. So the agent, wanting the matter settled, handed her over on approval to the station master's household to be kept and fed in trade for her work. The arrangement was meant to last out a season. It lasted 18 years. The old station master was not a cruel man, only a tired one, and he let her stay because it cost him little and she never once asked him for a thing. She wound the depot clock before dawn and swept the platform and kept the ledgers straight and mended what tore, and she took no wage and was offered none, and she carried herself as though she had chosen every hard hour of it herself. She knew the name of every child born in that valley, for she was there when the trains brought the doctors through. The town, for its part, learned nothing of her. They called her the Orphan-Train girl, and after a while they called her nothing at all, for a person with no people has no name that anyone need trouble to keep, and such a one is easy to walk past in the street. She had no pew of her own in the church. No one had ever written her into a single record that mattered. Then, in the autumn, the old station master died in his chair with the clock still ticking, and the railroad sent a younger man to take the post, and the younger man came with a wife. The wife took one look at the quiet woman moving about the rooms of the house she meant to keep, and did not want her there. It was not a thing she felt she needed a reason for, but the town supplied one anyway. Mrs. Teal, who made a long study of other households and called it charity, allowed that a stray without kin was nobody's proper business and best not encouraged. Elder Pryor, who could set a verse of Scripture to any purpose he pleased, agreed that a Christian house did right to keep itself clear of whatever it could not account for. So on the first hard evening of the winter they set the carpet-bag in her hands and paid her the full wages of her leaving, which came to nothing at all, and they put her out and shut the door, and she walked down to the only place her feet had ever truly known, which was the platform where no one had claimed her the first time. There was a rancher in town that day, come in for the last of his winter stores before the pass closed. He was a man near the far end of his 30s, black hair going gray at the temples, a short beard trimmed close, a heavy gray mackinaw with black lapels gone dark at the shoulders with melt. He had buried his wife 2 winters back, and had a boy and a girl at home who had gone as quiet as the house itself since their mother was put in the ground. He was loading sacks into his wagon when the depot emptied its verdict onto the snow, and he watched the whole gathered crowd of that town find somewhere else to look. He set down what he carried. He crossed the boards to where she stood, and he took his wide black hat off his head and held it in both his hands against his chest, as a man holds it at a graveside. "I don't know your name," he said, loud enough for the whole platform to hear him, "and it seems no one here does, which is a shame on this town and not on you. But I've got a good stove and a warm house and 2 children in it who could stand a steady hand, and I'd sooner say this plain and be talked about than say nothing and be respectable." He turned the hat once in his hands. "There's a bed by the stove. You're claimed now. And any man on this platform who don't care for it can come warm himself at his own fire and leave mine be." She did not weep, and she did not thank him, for 18 years had worn the begging clean out of her. She looked at him a long moment, as though the words were in a language she had heard of but never once been spoken to in. "I don't come cheap, and I don't come grateful," she said at last. "I keep a house, I mend, I read and cipher better than most, and I don't take charity I can't pay back. If that's a bargain you want, you can have it. If it's a rescue, you can keep it." "It's a bargain," he said. "I never trusted a thing that came cheap either." And he picked up her carpet-bag before she could stop him and carried it to the wagon himself. He drove her out through the falling snow to a log house on the range with a good stone chimney, and he did every plain thing a decent man does. He built the fire up high and set soup to warming and laid dry blankets by the hearth. And he gave her the loft room at the head of the stair, and he put a bolt on the inside of that door with his own hands so she might throw it and sleep sound. And because he knew the town would talk and meant to give it nothing true to say, he sent his wagon back into the settlement that same night and fetched out the wife of his hired man, a broad, stubby woman named Mrs. Hale, to sleep under the same roof as a witness anyone could name. Everything was kept plain and open and above the reach of a wagging tongue. The talk came anyway, as he had known it would. Mrs. Teal drove out within the week under the flag of Christian concern and sat herself down and worked around at last to her point. "It is a bold thing," she said. "A strange woman kept in a widower's house. You must think of what the town will be made to say." The rancher heard her out to the end. Then he set his cup down. "You put her out in a blizzard to keep your name clean," he said, "and now you've driven clear out here to keep it cleaner. I'll tell you a thing, ma'am. A town that let a child stand on 7 platforms and get passed over 7 times and calls itself Christian while it does it has got no roll worth being struck from. So talk if it warms you. My door don't open to it, and it won't." And Mrs. Teal took her leave a good deal faster than she had come. What the woman did next, no one in that country had ever thought to do for her, not once in all her years. She had noticed, for she noticed everything, that the 2 children went out into the cold with nothing on their coats to say whose they were. So she sat by the lamp of an evening with a needle, and into the hem of the boy's coat and the cuff of each of the girls' small mittens she worked the family's own letter in close, tight stitches, the letter that began their name. The boy turned the cuff over in his hands and asked her why. "Because a child ought never to be astray," she said. "If you're ever lost, and it's cold, and you're too frightened to say your own name out loud, then whoever finds you has only to look here, and they'll know in a breath exactly whose you are, and they'll know just where to bring you. Nobody who's marked is nobody's. You remember that. You've got a name and a place and a letter that says so, and no weather and no town can take it off you." She marked their heights on the doorframe with the edge of a knife, a notch and the day, so the house would remember them growing. She set a low hook by the door for each child and burned the name into the wood above it, so that coming in from the dark they had a place that was theirs and no one else's. She was giving that silent house back the small rights of belonging, the ones that tell a child every ordinary day that it is counted and kept, the very ones no living hand had ever performed for her. The boy took to leaving his coat where she would be sure to find it, though he was old enough by half to hang it himself. And then one evening the little girl took up the needle when she thought no one watched, and drew the woman's one good shawl into her lap, the russet wool that was the single warm color she owned, and into its hem she sewed the family's letter, crooked and far too big, and pulling the cloth so it puckered. "What are you about, child?" the woman asked, gentle. "So people know whose you are too," the girl said, not looking up from her stitches. "So if you get lost, we'll know to come and get you." The rancher was standing in the doorway of the room, come to say some small thing about the fire, and he did not say it. He stood there with his hand on the frame, and then he turned and walked back out into the snow, and he did not come in again for a long while, and no one in that house pretended not to know why. The snow settled in after that, and closed the pass and closed the roads, and the world narrowed down to the walls of the house and the ring of lamplight inside it. The days took on a shape. There were lessons at the table after supper, and mending by the stove, and a checkerboard the boy could not yet win, but would not quit, and the notches on the doorframe climbed by a hair, and something grew up quiet among the four of them that not one of them said a word about, banking down warm and steady like coals raked over for the night. Out in town, the wife of the hired man had taken to answering the gossip to its face. "I have lived under that roof and slept behind that bolt," she would say, "and I'll tell you there's more true religion in that log house than in the whole front pew of your church, and you may quote me by name." But respectability does not care to be left unanswered, and when the roads opened enough for travel, Elder Pryor and the new station master's wife called the town together in the church to see the matter settled before spring. A woman with no kin, no name, and no letters, the elder said, standing before them all, kept these months in a decent man's house. We do not even rightly know what she is. The rancher stood up in that meeting and defended her, and named her a soul of more worth than the whole room laid end to end. But it was not his voice that turned it. It was hers. She rose from the bench and stood in the aisle, level and low, without a tear or a plea, in a single word. "I will tell you what I am," she said, "since you have called a meeting to decide it. I came west on the Orphan-Train when I was 11 years old, with my name pinned to my coat like the direction on a parcel. The train stopped 7 times before the end of the line, and 7 times the families came out and walked along us where we stood and felt our arms and chose. They chose the small ones and the fair ones and the boys who looked to be strong. 7 times they walked on past me. At the last stop there was no family left and no child left but me, so the agent gave me over on approval as you'd hand over a horse you weren't yet sure of to be kept for my labor. That was 18 years ago. I have wound your depot clock every morning of it. I have known the name of every child born in this valley. And not one of you ever once asked me mine. You never needed it to talk about me in the street." There was a silence when she finished, and into that silence a woman stood up at the back, the blacksmith's wife. "I came on that train too," she said, quiet, "a different year. Nobody asked me either. Then the freighter rose from his place beside the stove. I came on one like it," he said, "out of Chicago when I was 9. Then the tanner stood, an old man who had never once spoken up in that church in his life. And I, he said. And that was all he said. One by one they rose, the grown children of the orphan trains, the hidden kin the label had never thought to count, until a good part of that room was on its feet, and the rest of it could not meet their eyes. Then the rancher came down the aisle with the family Bible in his 2 hands and opened it to the record page where the marriages and the births and the deaths of his people were set down in ink, and he turned it so the elder could read. "You say we don't know what she is," he said. "I knew what she was in November. Here's her name, in my hand, dated the week the child sewed the mittens. I wrote clear back east to the Placing Society and asked them the one thing this town never troubled to ask in 18 years, what she was called. And when the answer came, I set it in the book of my family, because she was already ours. You've convened a meeting to wonder about a woman I'd already claimed and written down." Elder Pryor looked at that page a long moment. Then he took up his hat and left the church a good deal smaller than he had come into it, undone by his own proverb turned back against him. The thaw came slow that year, and the rancher would not put the question, while the asking might be mistaken for a debt she owed. He waited. In the spring, the full ledger came out from the placing society with the law behind it, and it gave up her birth name plain and free, and it named the old station-master's estate liable for 18 years of an honest servant's wages, every dollar of it, and paid it over into her own hand. So, when the roads were open, and her name was her own, and the money was hers, and she owed that house and that town not one thing on this earth, she was free to walk down to the depot, buy a ticket to anywhere, and never once look back. And it was only then, with all of that made true, that he stood in the dooryard with his hat in his hands, as he had the very first day. "You're free now," he said. Named, paid, and owing nobody. You could take that ticket and be gone by dark, and I'd not say a word against it. That's why I waited to ask. Stay for good, not for the roof, not for the children, not because you've got nowhere. Stay because you choose it. That's the only way I'd have it. The train gave me a number, she said, and the town gave me a label, and in 18 years not one living soul asked me what I was called. You were the first. You had to write clear across the country to hear it, but you asked, and then you wrote it down where it would keep. She looked at the crooked letter still puckering the hem of her shawl. I've got a name of my own now, bought and paid for and printed on a paper with a seal, but I find I'd sooner take yours. And she did. They were married before the last of the snow was off the north slope, and she lived out the whole long remainder of her life in that house on the range. The notches on the doorframe climbed year upon year, the boys and the girls and then the ones who came after, and no one ever picked the crooked letter out of the shawl, and it hung by the door on its own hook with her name burned in the wood above it until the wool at last wore through. The children grew and married and brought their own to be measured on that same frame. And one day, far off, there would be 2 graves side by side on the rise above the house, and one of them would carry, cut deep in the stone, the whole of the name the world had once refused to learn. And that was the story of the orphan-train girl no family would claim, who stood a second time on the platform where she had been passed over, and was chosen at last by a quiet man with his hat in both his hands, the one the town could not be bothered to name, until a widower rode away across a whole continent to ask, and set her down in his family Bible weeks before anyone else thought to wonder, and gave her, along with a bed by the stove, the one thing 18 winters had never given her, which was to be somebody's own. If this one warmed you tonight, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I hope it found you well. I'll see you in the next one.